Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and a special guest later on. It's going to be Ian Valentino, who is an NFL and NFL draft analyst for the 33rd team. I've known Ian for a long time. Really like his college breakdowns, really like his college quarterback breakdowns. So in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about a bunch of Northern guys in this 2024 NFL draft. We'll talk about Michael Penix and J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix, the top Northern quarterbacks. We'll talk about the top Northern running backs, the top Northern corners, the top Northern offensive tackles, the top Northern wide receivers. But I want to prepare you first of all. And I'm telling you this now. This is one of those, if you don't catch this as a preview, if the draft already happened by the time you're watching or listening to this, listen to it anyway, because you can see how it worked out. Because I'm the only person, we're the only show that thinks of things this way. That's why you're here. We're the only North versus South show. So we're the only place that's going to tell you that the North has a chance at its best elite talent draft since 1967. This is historic for the North because this is the framework that I'm looking at for here. And I think it's a fair framework. And you make statistics what you want them to be. It's one of the first things you learn in journalism school. Math is malleable. I'm looking at the top 16. I'm looking at the top half of the first round, which I think is okay because that's the elite of the elite. And what we are talking about here is a chance that there could be 10 Northern players taken in the first 16 picks of this draft. The most ever in the common draft. You will do a little history. You guys want to do a little history? So like there was the NFL and everybody was happy. And then the AFL came in and they were like a dragon and they started burning down everything. And initially the AFL and the NFL had separate drafts. And then they were like, what do we do? So they had something they started calling the common draft. And it was the first one was in 1967. And that's when they drafted together. And then eventually, of course, the AFL merged with the NFL. But 1967 is the first year of the common draft, and we sort of still call it the common draft. So this is like the modern draft. And 1967, that first year when Michigan State defensive end Bubba Smith was the number one pick, that's the only Northern year that might see more Northern players in the top 16 than what we're going to see right now this year in 2024. Since then, there have never been more than 9 Northern players taken in the top 16. The last time was in 2016, and that was that big Ohio State run with all those guys after that 2014 Ohio State national championship team. Joey Bosa at 3, Ezekiel Elliott at 4, Eli Apple at 10, Taylor Decker at 16. There's 9 Northern guys in the top 16. 4 of them are Buckeyes. Also 1996, 1995, 1987, 1974. Right now, if you look at stuff, I'm like this much out over my skis. It's not a guarantee the North gets to 10, but if you are watching or listening to this before the draft, track it. And we'll remind you who our Northern teams are. We're going to run through the players in a second, but track it and see if the North can make history because they'll at least have 7 at the minimum, which there was a time like there's a stretch here where like the North was getting 4 or 5 guys in the top 16, and that was it for a long time. So even 7 would be good. I think 8, they'll at least get 8. 9 or 10 is definitely on the table. So 9 or 10 would be great. And like, why do I care? Well, I care because I couch everything in college football as North versus South. And this is a great place to do North versus South because it's not a game. So you don't have to be worried about hating your rival. I don't know if you love your Northern team and you hate another Northern team, are you like rooting against their players getting picked? Are there Oregon fans who are like, oh, I hope Michael Penix doesn't go in the top 16? Would you do that? I don't know. Maybe you would. Are there Ohio State fans who are like, oh, I hope J.J. McCarthy doesn't go in the top 5? I don't know. I kind of hope not. I hope Washington fans aren't hoping for Bo Nix to fall into the second round. I hope Michigan fans aren't rooting for Marvin Harrison Jr. to not be the number 1 receiver or something. So this is a good chance to just purely tell the South to cram it on the draft board. And it is unusual. So like, this is like, we're couching it this way, but there's a chance at history here. And I do think like elite talent matters. So elite talent matters both when we look back on what happened last season when we had 2 Northern teams in the national championship game, and when we think about what is to come. Because it's not about all the time, can the North beat the South? But it's, can the North compete with the South? And when you look at things like this, it is an indication. Number one is on the field, but it's affirmation, confirmation, indication that the North is competing, can compete, will compete with the South. So please keep this in mind as you watch the draft or as you look back on the draft. How many Northern players went in the first half of the first round? So let's talk about who that is. So the mock draft database, I don't know if you guys go look at this. I enjoy it. I like looking at goofy stuff on the internet when people gather information and synergize it. We're a synergy show. We don't only create our own information. We want to take other people's information and discuss it and synergize it and contextualize it. So the mock draft database takes everybody's mock draft. If you have a mock draft, call them up on the interwebs and say, hey, put me in your mock draft. But they could create consensus. So here's their mock draft database consensus mock draft. They add everything together going into the draft. Okay, here's the Northern guys in the top 16. Number 4, Marvin Harrison Jr., the Ohio State wide receiver. Number 6, Odunze, the Washington wide receiver. Number 7, Joe Alt, the Notre Dame left tackle. Number 11, J.J. McCarthy, the Michigan quarterback. Number 12, Bo Nix, the Oregon quarterback. Number 13, Taliese Fuaga, the Oregon State right tackle. Number 14, Fashanu, the Penn State left tackle. Number 15, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, has a chance to be the first cornerback off the board. And 16, Troy Fashanu, another tackle from Washington. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in the mock draft database consensus draft. 9 of the top 16 players are Northern guys. And then we have 4 other guys that I think certainly could squeeze into the top 16. First and foremost is Michael Penix Jr. from Washington, who won our award last year as the King of the North, the best player in the North, finished second in the Heisman. I think he's going to go in the top 16 because, like the mock draft database, they have stuff from way back, and it's not like I'm talking to people, but I'm reading people. And a lot of the draft analysts think that Michael Penix is like going to wind up in the top 16. And I think he will too, and I think he should. And we'll talk about him more with Ian in a little bit, but I think he gets in there. So that would be 10 if nobody else falls out. But I also think Johnny Newton from Illinois, who we loved, was a finalist for the King of the North last year, is one of the best 5 Northern players. In the mix is probably like the second best defensive tackle. Could he go in the top 16? Could Cooper DeJean, probably a battle between Quinyon Mitchell at Toledo, Cooper DeJean at Iowa, and Terrion Arnold from Alabama to be the first corner. Could Cooper DeJean slide into the top 16? And then Chop Robinson, everybody loves edge rushers, the edge rusher from Penn State. So those are our guys. Like, how could this happen? So again, if you're coming here after the fact, go back. Did it work out? But that's like a really good group of top Northern players. And I think that matters. So let's talk now about what it all means. And the North is catching up. We're going to spend a lot of time this summer before we get to our 5-day-a-week launch in late July, early August, defining ourselves, defining Northern football, and defining the fact that the North has closed the gap. And I think there are a couple lines in the sand. Well, the most recent line in the sand is the 2006 Ohio State-Michigan game when they were 1-2. Some people thought that after that game was played, that the best 1-2 national championship game would be an Ohio State-Michigan rematch. We know USC lost in the last week of that regular season, opened the door for Florida. But in that moment where you think about where Ohio State and Michigan were and how you thought of college football, it's before the rise of this version of the SEC. That was like the last vestige of Northern superiority in college football. And maybe not even superiority, not that it was maybe consistent the whole way, but the SEC took over, starting with the 2006 national championship game when Florida destroyed Ohio State. So like that's a line in the sand to me. And I think since then, you could look at a lot of different things, and the NFL draft is among them, where you just see the South dominating. And I think that's about to turn. I don't think this is a blip. I think it's the beginning of a trend. I do think we're early in the trend because some of the things that I think are going to matter here, NIL NIL in particular, the consolidation of Northern power within the Big Ten in a lot of ways, but also I think opportunities for schools like Utah and Colorado and Iowa State and West Virginia and schools like that, Cincinnati, to thrive in the Big 12. I think that's real. And I think the ACC with our 3 Northern ACC schools, I think those schools are situated with Bill O'Brien at Boston College, Fran Brown at Syracuse, new head coaches, new offensive coordinator at Pitt. Like, I like the trend lines of those 3 schools as well. So I think there are structural things right now that are happening in college football that are going to lead to a rise of the new North that we're going to be talking about here. So like this is part of it. Like, how do you track this? You track it head-to-head games. We're going to track it Alabama, Wisconsin this year. We're going to track it Michigan, Texas this year. I used to track it a lot in bowl games. I cared a lot in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. I cared a lot about what the Big Ten was doing in bowl games and were they winning bowl games. But bowl games, like in this modern era, are no longer a way to judge anything because there's so many opt-outs. Teams aren't who they were during the regular season. Bowls are not indicative of anything. In a 14 playoff, it's such a small group. The 12-team playoff is going to tell us a lot. But this also tells us something, the NFL draft, which is why we want to talk about it here, why this matters, why I'm going to track this every year. And we'll go back. I will go back after this draft is over, and I will count up all the picks from the South, all the picks from the North, all the picks from our border or California schools that are not in the North. But I also don't want to give credit to the South for Stanford. And I don't want to give credit to the South for Louisville, that we're on the border of should they be a Northern team or not. So I have some border California schools. And one of the things we have to do here, and we'll continue to do this as we do this show, is define the North. So just for this exercise, you guys need that definition. Here it is. 134 schools playing FBS football this coming year. By my count, the way we do it, 51 of those schools are Northern schools, 68 are Southern schools, and 15 are either border schools, California schools, Nevada schools. I threw in Nevada with California and Hawaii too. Hawaii is not the South. Beautiful. Not the South, not the North, not the South. So that's 15 on the border. So we just got to put like USC and UCLA. I'm not counting them for the North, but I'm not counting them in with Bama and Georgia and Texas and LSU and Florida either. So that's how we define this. So as we think about this, you just need to have that in mind. Okay. So the South has an edge. Why would I do that? Maybe we get some campuses to move north. Come on, North. Come on, North. This is a place to be. But anyway, 68, 51, 15. So why does that matter? Let's talk about, since 2007, that line in the sand. The 2007 draft is after the 2006 season. Florida beats Ohio State. Nick Saban arrived at Alabama in 2005. We are now in this Urban Meyer at Florida, Nick Saban at Alabama era. Here comes the South. Down comes the North. Okay. Since 2007, the average draft, the first 16 players, on average, since then, since 2007, 9 Southern players, 5 Northern players, and 2 from border or California schools. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a world where 5 was pretty decent, and the North had 3 sometimes, and the South had 10 sometimes. And in that entire stretch, since 2007, the only NFL draft where in the top 16 picks, there were more Northern than Southern, because like what happens on the border in California schools matter. The only draft, one, that had more Northern than Southern was that 2016 draft with all those Ohio State guys. There were 9 that year. The North beat the South. That's the only time. At the very least, the North has beaten the South this year. Even if the North doesn't break its record since 1967, they're going to beat the South. Because like Caleb Williams is a border guy, he's a California guy. And the North is going to have like at least 7 or 8. And they're going to beat the South. So that's a big deal too. But it has a chance to be like an even bigger deal. So please track this in your home. You may shout, cram it to the South. Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo comes off the board, while Terry and Arnold from Alabama is still on the board. You may shout, cram it South. J.C. Latham, who's like the best offensive tackle from the South from Alabama, he doesn't get picked while maybe 4 or 5 Northern offensive tackles go ahead of him. You may yell, cram it South. Because also something's going to happen here that's a reminder of something we've talked about on this show. and we'll bring up times when we know we were right and maybe people disputed our rightness. Michigan has a chance, and Jim Harbaugh called his shot on this before last season. Said he thought Michigan had a chance with this team to break the record for the most draft picks. Michigan won on talent. Michigan won that national championship on talent. Now, is Michigan going to dominate the first round? No. J.J. McCarthy, probably the only first-round pick for Michigan this year. But they're going to have a lot of guys in rounds 2, 3, and 4. Mike Sanders still at nickel. Blake Corum at running back. Junior Colson at linebacker. They're going to have a lot of guys on the offensive line. They're going to have a lot of guys in the middle rounds. And the point that I want to make is this. The great champions in modern college football have been led by NFL draft prospects. The record right now of most picks in a single year for a team is held by Georgia, who had 15 picks in 2022. What is that? Those are the players who helped Georgia win the national championship in 2021. Okay? Like, we get that, right? You win a national championship, you send a bunch of guys to the league. Second, 2004 Ohio State. Those are all those guys from the 2002 Ohio State national championship team. Like, a lot of them were back in 2003, but that's what that is. And 2020 LSU, all the guys from the 2019 LSU national championship. Tied for the fourth best draft, 2018 Alabama had 12 players, all the guys from the 2017 Alabama national championship team. And 2016 Ohio State had 12, all the guys from the 2014 Ohio State national championship team. Again, all those guys were back. Joey Bosa, Zeke Elliott, we already mentioned them. They were all back in 15, so there was a year lag. But these are all, look at all the best drafts for a team. Georgia, Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, Ohio State. Those 5 teams all won national championships with that NFL draft talent. Guess what? So did Michigan. Michigan is going to go right into this mix. If you look at the mock draft database, the number of picks that will be made in this NFL draft and where Michigan guys are projected, 14 guys are projected to be picked for Michigan. That would not break the record. It would tie them for second. They have a shot at 15 or 16, though. So this will be something to monitor on day 3. Something to monitor on round 7. I'm sure Michigan fans will care about this. Like, can this happen? But they are going to be in this group. They are going to be in this top 5, guaranteed. And guess what? Washington's going to be close. Washington has 11 guys projected to be taken in this draft. And they're going to have 3 in the first round, maybe 3 in the top 16, with quarterback Michael Penix, receiver Odunze, and tackle Troy Fashanu. So what are we talking about? We spent a lot of time talking about how old Washington was. And you can't dispute that. And we went through the stats and how many 5th and 6th year guys they had, and that was rare and unusual. But can we please put to rest any discussion about the talent levels of Michigan and Washington from last year? They're going to have 25, 26, 27 guys drafted between them. So this is the reality. The North is coming. North is kind of here. And it's not just Ohio State. There was a time where Ohio State was, whether people want to hear it or not, was kind of legitimately the only program that could compete when it comes to stuff like this. And now we're talking about other teams that can compete. Oregon's going to get to this place where Oregon's going to compete when it comes to NFL draft picks. I wonder if Notre Dame can get to a place where it'll compete potentially, right? Maybe not 15, but 10, 11 with NFL draft picks. Can Penn State get there, right? Ohio State will be there again. Ohio State next year's draft with as many guys that stayed in school in Columbus, Ohio State's going to have a shot at 14, 15 guys drafted a year from now. But in the meantime, keep your eyes peeled. My prediction, I guess my official prediction in the end is that it's 9 and that there will be 9 of the top 16 from the North in this draft. And they will fall slightly short of being the best draft since 1967 when they had 13. But I'm going to be tracking it. You can follow us, KOTN CFB on Twitter. I'll be tracking it there. Follow us, KOTN CFB on Instagram. We put up stuff there, but I'm going to be on alert for this. So when we take a quick break, we'll be back and we will discuss the very best players from the North in this 2024 NFL Draft with Ian Valentino from the 33rd team. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Time now to dive in to the 2024 NFL Draft with one of my favorite draft guys. He's Ian Valentino. He's with the 33rd team, which is a site that was started several years ago by some former NFL people, Joe Banner, Mike Lombardi. And Ian, I've always loved your breakdowns. It's some of your quarterback stuff that you put out on social media, especially, I really love. So we've talked before, but I'm super psyched to have you here on Kings of the North.
Yeah, I'm super excited. You know, people probably don't know this, but I probably listen to about 90% of your podcasts. Not just sucking up, but Doug, you are one of my favorite hosts, and for better or for worse, sometimes I'm chuckling along with the conversation. So whenever you reached out, I was like, oh, it's always an absolute yes. So we've got a great draft class, though. I really appreciate the kind words. I didn't do as much out in public this year, just with my other roles and stuff, kind of taking up my time. But that doesn't mean that I don't know about the class, or at least think I know about the class, right? Like you think you know, and then they get in the NFL, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we don't know anything.
You know, think you know is better sometimes. It's what I go by. Because sometimes when you know, you're just setting yourself up. So like, I think I know can be really good. So, and it's also, by the way, you're the one who watches and listens. So that's great. So we've got one. All right, Ian. I want to run through all the best Northern guys. I want to talk corners. I want to talk offensive tackles. I want to talk running backs. I want to talk receivers, but I want to talk quarterbacks first. And I want to talk the idea of whether Michael Penix Jr. is CJ Stroud light. And when we talk about accuracy, anticipation, making tough throws, hitting tiny windows, is that where we are with Penix?
You know, that is a really great question. And I never made the direct connection. I did once link them in the way that I said that when we look at Michael Penix's game against Texas, that was CJ Stroud's game against Georgia, where you looked at it and you said, well, if this guy did this every single game, maybe not even every single game, right? But like if Stroud did that against Michigan, how would CJ Stroud be viewed? I think he would have been a slam dunk #1 pick. And so we saw a lot of great out of CJ, but we didn't really see the playmaking. And it was the same thing with Penix. We didn't really see the playmaking, the plays out of structure, how he handled pressure. But against Texas, he did it all. He just absolutely nailed that game. And so I think there are some small parallels there. CJ had youth on his side. He was a much younger guy. Penix is 24 already. A lot of injuries in his background. I don't think he's the athlete that CJ is. Like, I don't think anyone's upset that Penix didn't run. Whereas CJ Stroud, he didn't run, and obviously you know that discussion. So I think that there is an element, though, of he's such a good pocket passer, Penix. Obviously both guys, but both guys are such good pocket passers. There's an element of, are we underrating the ability to just win from the pocket? And I don't know that we are, because look at the NFL and how it works. Really, the only pocket passer is Joe Burrow. Outside of him, there's not a lot of guys succeeding from that level. So you have to be so good in the pocket that you have to be at that level to be a difference-making quarterback. Like, if you're Kirk Cousins, yeah, you're okay with that. I mean, the guy got 180 million, so like obviously he's good, but like, where are you taking that in today's NFL? I don't really know. That's a great question. We're going to find out here soon, because I don't think the teams value that from a draft aspect too much, because it kind of limits what you do. And when I look at CJ, I just think CJ had so many more athletic ability moments, those traits where they showed through, where he's outside the pocket and he did make those great throws on the move. We just wanted to see it more because he was so good at it. And I don't think Penix has that. Look at his QBR under pressure. It's in the toilet. Anytime that there's a free rusher against him, he's either throwing the ball away or just throwing it deep. I just don't think he has the poise. I don't think he has the makeup to be a player like CJ, where CJ is already getting ranked as like a top 6, top 7 NFL QB. So I think there's small parallels, but I don't think he's quite to that level that CJ had the traits to go above and beyond.
Michael Penix, 48 scramble yards this past season, which is like almost zero. CJ Stroud, his last year at Ohio State, had 129. Again, we're talking about, Jaden Daniels had more than 700 scramble yards at LSU. So Drake May was like 3rd in the nation at North Carolina in scramble yards. So sometimes like when you're looking at quarterbacks running yards, it's like, well, if they're using them in the run game, that's probably not going to be a huge part of it in the NFL. But it's like, what are they doing, as you said, when there's a free rusher when things break down, do guys have an ability to use their legs? Is this to the point? Is Penix limited enough in your mind that you would not view him as a first-round quarterback? Because it certainly felt like early in the process he's maybe a second-round guy. Now, late in the process here, as we approach the draft, it feels like he might go in the top half of the first round. Do you think he's a first-rounder?
I don't. I've got a day 2 grade on him. I'm probably tougher on grading quarterbacks anyways than some. But for me, a day 2 guy, he could be a starter. He could be a good starter. To me, an average starter isn't really worth drafting, though. Like, you look at like Tua Tagovailoa, I think he's in that range, and I like Tua. Okay. But what I like about Tua has changed because the NFL has changed over the time since he's been drafted. Like now, Miami, the prospect of giving him all this money is really daunting because he's not a guy that can overcome. And I think that's where you look at Penix. It's the same limitation. So for me, you're handcuffing yourself to a guy who might be stuck in that average range. You need to have an elite offensive line. You need to have 1 or 2 really good receivers. I mean, that's just so small of a margin for error that I'm not comfortable with it. But it's hard because teams are in a different place, right? Like you get fired if you don't even find an average quarterback. So it's a really delicate thing where I can understand why teams would take him and try to build around him and try to buy some time. But you got to be careful not to end up in purgatory with him.
Tua is a really interesting comparison too. And that idea of there's such a specificity to the way you have to win, as opposed to when you have those mobile guys, it feels like they can save you sometimes. So I like Penix, and I do think he has a chance. I mean, I understand the injury concerns. Some of the stuff with the age, I don't get sometimes because it's like, oh no, in 10 years he'll be 34. It's like, how many quarterbacks get to a second contract with their teams? Like, what a great problem to have that our successful quarterback hit his early 30s sooner than we ideally would have liked. For real, I would just take the guy. I don't care really what his age is. I understand the injury stuff. Okay, so you wouldn't take him in the first round. In a quarterback hungry universe, do you think he will go in the first round?
I always look at the late buzz really skeptically. I don't think we will. I don't think he'll go in the first. You hit that middle of the first round though, and those sweet spots are really enticing. Like Las Vegas, I don't know if they're going to be able to trade up. Minnesota, I think they'll be able to trade up if they really want to. I mean, they have the ammunition to do it, but like I think that they could be a Bo Nix spot. So like if they take Nix or if they trade up, all of a sudden then you're looking at 5 quarterbacks in the top 10 potentially, or in the top 11, 12. And then you've got Denver at 12. They don't have a second round pick. So what do you just force the pick? So there's a good chance. And then obviously the end of the first round, like there's always that discussion. So I would, if I'm a betting man, I would say no, but I do think that the buzz this past week, there's a lot more logic to it than what we usually see. Like last year with like the Will Levis going number 2 stuff, It never passed a smell test. This actually does, because I think middle of the first round, the guy's apparently done great on the whiteboard, which makes sense. He's got a ton of experience. His film speaks for itself. He's a really good passer. There's no doubt about that. The guy can throw the ball. So if you're that desperate and you don't have the picks, New Orleans, I think, could use a quarterback too, even though they've got Derek Carr. That contract is awful. But he was so bad last year. I think they would have to consider it too. So the need is there. Now the question is, does some team just not care about the optics? And usually that's more of a yes.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about another Northern quarterback who's the opposite of Michael Penix, who beat Michael Penix in the national championship game, and Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy. Just a little comparison here. According to PFF, Michael Penix had 577 dropbacks last year. J.J. McCarthy had 370. So Michael Penix is back in the pocket surveying 200 more times than J.J. McCarthy last year. It just tells you a little bit of so much what Washington did, which was get back there, chuck it 20 yards downfield on every down. And if you're 1 for 3, you get a first down. And Michigan is so fascinating to me. We all felt going into last season that J.J. McCarthy was the elevator for Michigan football. I felt like in the end, they didn't lean on him as much as I thought they would. They went 15-0 and won the national championship anyway. It made you think, actually, how good is J.J. McCarthy? And then it's like, oh no, he's a top 5 player. And it's like, how did this happen? How did Michigan have a top 5 quarterback and not really use him? It's fascinating. How much do you like JJ McCarthy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I view him more similarly to Nix and Penix than I would the other guys. And
Okay.
because I have to go back to the traits, right? Like you got to start with the traits. Strong arm, no doubt about that. The guy can make any throw on the field. He is mobile, can get him outside the pocket. He's a bit of a knucklehead. We saw it against Ohio State. He'll try some throws, but you got to try those throws in the NFL. Like you've got to have a little bit of that loose nut in your head that says, I'm JJ McCarthy. I can make this throw. And then sometimes you do, and then sometimes you don't, right? But like you've got to have that. So I appreciate those things about him. But on the other hand, the guy had the best offensive line in football. He had, Roman Wilson, who was excellent. He had a really good tight end who's going to be probably a first-round pick next year. Obviously, we know about the running back situation. He had for Jim frickin' Harbaugh as his head coach. He's probably going to go, JJ's next head coach is probably not going to be as good of an offensive coach or quarterback coach as Jim Harbaugh. And that's always a tough thing to do because CJ faced the same questions. And obviously it didn't matter for CJ. But there's a lot of projection there but CJ also carried an offense, which is the different part. There's a lot there to say. Now his accuracy isn't great. That guy he has a cannon on his arm, but you have no idea where it's going sometimes too. So that's a big factor for me. I really value that accuracy. So I look at JJ and I like him, but am I trading, if I'm Minnesota, am I moving 3 first-round picks for him? I don't think so. I think I'd rather stick there. And if I'm at number 3, I really like Drake May. I like Jaden Daniels more. It's just there's so much unknown that it makes you uncomfortable. And we look over the history of these quarterbacks, Trey Lance, teams talk themselves into it. We can fix him, right? And JJ doesn't have quite as far to go, but he's still a project. And taking on the responsibility of the program is something that he didn't have to really deal with. As much of a good leader as he was and all these things that scouts love to say, he's a winner and all that stuff. Well, you're not a winner in the NFL till you win. And so I think he's a project. And I don't know that his traits are as good as like they need to be to really justify taking him that high.
Feels like I have seen at least a couple things as we get ready for the draft here of JJ McCarthy to New England at 3. And if New England winds up taking another Michigan quarterback who maybe in college didn't show everything that he could be, I mean, I don't know if Boston will explode in it's Tom Brady 2.0, or if they'll be like, Belichick left, Brady left, we're starting over, and it's JJ McCarthy that we're rebuilding around. I don't know how New England would potentially react to that idea. Worked out the first time.
Not too bad, right? That's fairly successful. Yeah.
I don't know. He can, but again, like it's such a different conversation than Penix. It's like off platform. Yeah. It's like that guy's like his offensive line was almost too good for him sometimes because it was like you could almost feel him being like, could things break down so I can get outside the pocket and like maybe throw a pass behind my back. So he's got some stuff there. I'm a little surprised at the rise, but I'm intrigued. And I do think I like him better than the third Northern quarterback I want to talk about, which is Bo Nix of Oregon. How much do you like Bo Nix? And do you think he's definitely going to go in the first round?
Yeah, so I would agree. I think I'd have JJ slightly higher. And some of that is age because we've seen Bo Nix about 5 years now. We saw him in Auburn. He is a tale of 2 quarterbacks. He was a totally different player at Auburn than he was at Oregon. That's for better and for worse. At Oregon, he was check down Charlie. He would take the conservative play. It was a totally different mindset from him, and he executed that scheme to almost perfection. But at the same time, what comes with that is when you're completing 75% of your passes is you're really not targeting anybody downfield. And when you are, you've got a guy in Troy Franklin who's a superstar. It's wide open most plays. So you don't want to hold that too much against him in the terms of like what he executed, what he didn't, who he played with. But the context of the offense, what you can tell with Nix is that he's got great mobility. He's got a thick frame, so he should be pretty durable. He has a strong arm, and he does still have some of that knucklehead in him because we saw a little bit of it at Oregon, and it worked out. And it led them almost to a national title opportunity. So yeah, he is incredibly interesting because I think if you can blend what you saw at Auburn, which was he wanted to carry the team on his back and had to, with what you saw at Oregon, which is he was never asked to do it outside of a couple like third downs. And can you find the blend of that? And it reminds me of Justin Herbert. I don't think he's Justin Herbert, but like Herbert did the same thing at Oregon. His first 2 years, he had to be Superman. Last 2 years, he was Clark Kent because they just played bully ball. And so he's interesting, but I do think that there's limitations there under pressure. His accuracy really drops. There's a lack of aggressiveness downfield. I almost wonder if they overcorrected too much on him to get him comfortable. Kenny Dillingham did an amazing job, and there's some stories out there on what he did as Oregon's offensive coordinator his first year. They were getting Nix into tune with the way he should play, but I think that they might have gone too conservative. So if I'm a team taking someone outside the top 10, I do like Nix. I think that he can be an average to above average quarterback. He's in that range where you can build a good offense around him. You're going to be limited at some point, though, and it's that same discussion. I think McCarthy could be a hit, whereas I don't think Nix. I just don't see him becoming a top 8 guy. I think he'll always kind of be in that 10 to 15, 18 range any given week. And to me, that's enough of a difference for me to take McCarthy higher. But Nix is intriguing, and I don't think he's bad. Like, there are people that just don't like him, and I don't see that. I think you're holding too much of Auburn against him. Like, when he had capable playmakers around him, he is undoubtedly a capable player.
Yeah, it's hard with, I think all three of these guys, the systems they were in so much affect the evaluation that Washington just wanted to chuck it downfield and had great playmakers, had 3 NFL receivers. What does that mean for Michael Penix? Michigan did not ask that much of J.J. McCarthy, and NFL teams are going to ask more. And Bo Nix, by PFF, among 86 qualifying quarterbacks in the Power 5 last year, he was 85th in average depth of target. Like, this guy was throwing short, like, not just sometimes, but all the time. It's a tough evaluation. And his, like, he threw short so much more at Oregon than he did at Auburn, and he became a better quarterback. And so it's like, did they just find a perfect system that now Oregon's going to do the same thing with Dylan Gabriel this year? And they have a way of playing that leads, smart, capable quarterbacks to have great success, but are they truly NFL quarterbacks coming out of that system? I think it's a very valuable question. It feels more like to me that Bo Nix is the kind of guy that you take in the second round and you think he'll be a good backup and maybe he hits great. I don't know that you take him in the first round and say, and this is our franchise quarterback. That does seem like a little bit of a risk to me.
Yeah, and that seems to be the buzz. Just kind of listening to like some of the other folks, like Thomas Shea, hearing him talk about it, like that's been very much the buzz I think that those people have heard. And I would agree. I have a day 2 grade on him. It's just hard when you have to make the pick. And I think Minnesota at like 23, I think that'd be like their ideal pick if they don't trade up and they can wait. And I think we get a little too excited about projecting guys going high that teams get desperate, and generally they don't get super desperate. So if that plays out, then I do think you could see, Nix at 23, then Penix maybe someone trades up for in the top of that second round, like maybe Vegas does it, so they don't have to go all in.
All right. So the last quarterback question I wanted to ask, and like after this conversation, I don't even know if I want to ask it. I wanted to compare the 3 Southern guys, the USC guy, the LSU guy, and the North Carolina guy, to these 3 Northern quarterbacks, because it feels like they will be the first 6 quarterbacks in the draft. And I was ready. Listen, man, it's a Northern show. I'm not going to say stuff I don't think, but I actually have. I'm not all in on Caleb Williams. I just thought some of the way things unfolded at USC last year gives me a little pause. Like, even though he's short, I kind of was all in on Bryce Young because I thought, like, that guy is poised. That guy, like, carried Alabama. He has his stuff together. I was all in on CJ Stroud because I thought he was so smart. I'm just not quite there with Caleb Williams, just sort of like from the stuff around him beyond the skill. Jaden Daniels from LSU, I didn't love as a Heisman winner, and I just think he's a little skinny, and I wonder how that works. And I think I do like Drake May, but coming out of North Carolina, J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix all certainly had more success in college than Drake May did. So, like, I'm not going to hold that against Drake May, but I was ready to plant my flag. I don't know if I'm going to plant it. Maybe I'll just keep my flag in my pocket, and I'll know it myself, that in the end, Nix, McCarthy, and Penix will wind up having a collectively better NFL careers than Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and Caleb Williams. But maybe you think that sounds crazy, because I think to the most people out there, that would sound crazy.
I won't say crazy, because I think when we look back at these quarterback classes, 01 was such a good example. Like, I thought Justin Fields was going to be just right up there among the most elite quarterbacks. He was bigger, faster, stronger than everyone. And maybe that hurt him. Maybe that stunted his development, because he was. And then he goes to a terrible situation. And I look at these quarterbacks, like, I'm with you with Jaden Daniels. He wouldn't have been my Heisman winner. Really good player, but he wouldn't have won the Heisman for me. And I think that there's more development with him that needs to be had than what most people are saying. So I think a lot of these guys will be situational. And I do think Caleb is the guy. However, personality-wise, I think you're right. That's going to determine his upside. Like, if he's not able to handle losing, or if he is just not the personality, and I don't know, but that's the concern with him, because physically he's got it all. So if he's not the mentality of a franchise quarterback, I think that's going to really determine the South QBs. I do like May, but he's young, and he plays like it. He plays like he's a young buck. He almost plays like Josh Allen, where it's like some of it's just like, man. And you don't have Josh Allen's arm, so you shouldn't be playing like Josh Allen. But he's talented. So if he goes to a situation that builds around him, great. But if he goes to the Patriots, and the Patriots keep putting around guys like me at wide receiver, well, that's going to be pretty tough. That's, I'm a decent athlete, I am, but so
good hands,
I don't
like a
think
6'1" 140. So yeah, what are you gonna do?
Oh yeah, right. Like, just put it in my chest, I might be able to catch it. But I think it's very situational. And I think I have enough respect for the Northern QBs to be able to say, if you put Penix in San Francisco, he's not going to usurp Brock Purdy. But if you put him in Miami or San Francisco, okay, he's probably going to be really good. Same thing with McCarthy and Nix. If you put them in the right situation, they've got the physical skill set. So I would take the South, but I don't think it's a slam dunk as what other people are saying.
I have a tendency to end up like believing in every quarterback coming out, knowing that it's ridiculous. But like, when you think about that draft you referenced, and that people thought Trevor Lawrence was a sure thing at number 1, and like, he's good, but he's not necessarily a sure thing. And then it feels like the next 4 quarterbacks, they were all the wrong answer. Zach Wilson, wrong. Trey Lance, wrong. Justin Fields, at least kind of wrong. And Mac Jones, wrong. Like, wrong enough that none of the 4 are on the team that drafted them anymore. So they were at least wrong for their teams. I do think Justin Fields has a chance to still get it together in Pittsburgh and maybe wind up being a pretty decent starting quarterback. But like, that's the reality here, that when we talk about these 6 quarterbacks, they're not going to go 5 for 6. They're probably not going to go 4 for 6. It's probably going to be like more like 2.5 for 6 would turn out pretty well. I'm super intrigued to see where Penix ends up. All right. There's more than quarterbacks, though, in this draft. And there's some awesome offensive tackles. And this is a really good tackle draft. Everybody says that. And the reason it's a good tackle draft is because of the North. Because since in the last 25 years, there have only been 5 drafts where there have been at least 3 Northern offensive tackles taken in the first round. There were 2 years in which 4 went, 1999 and 2008. And it feels like there are definitely going to be 4 Northern offensive tackles taken in the first round, and maybe 5. And that's Joe Alt of Notre Dame, Olu Fashanu of Penn State, Taliese Fuaga of Oregon State, and Troy Fashanu of Washington. We'll talk about all of them a little bit. Is Joe Alt of Notre Dame going to be what Joe Thomas was coming out of Wisconsin, which is like a 12-year Pro Bowl player who winds up in the Hall of Fame?
I think so. I think he's as close, and I think that's the cleanest comp that you can come up with, and it's because of that polish. Look at Alt's game. Very, very little that you would change about it. It's like, could he be a little bit more effective in the run game as far as using his power? Sure. But he's 6'9", so he's not going to be a guy that, dives deep and, pushes guys. I mean, he's going to push guys around, but he's not going to be the mauler that some of these other guys are that have 3 to 6 inches less on him. So, but extremely refined as a pass protector, sharp as a whistle. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like, his awareness when guys are coming off of stunts and delayed blitzes, like, you can't beat him. It was uncanny. And the only team that he really struggled against was Ohio State. And so it was kind of funny how that played out, where, Ohio State's edge rushers, but Ohio State's edge rushers have NFL bodies and they have NFL skill sets. So in a way, though, he learned and he got to experience that. And I think that's actually a positive for him that he could learn that. And JTT was a heck of a problem for him at times. And I think that's going to actually bode pretty well for Alt. So I'm with you. I think that the North's tackles are fantastic. I actually love all three of these guys. But Alt to me is probably the number 2, number 3 player in the draft overall behind Marv.
Oh, wow.
And it's just because I don't see any way that this guy fails.
Yeah, that's the thing too, that it's hard when like your floor is so high. It's like, it feels like if he doesn't make it, he's a good 10-year starting tackle. That's like a miss. And if he hits, he's a Hall of Famer maybe. So like, good luck to Joe Alt. We're putting that on you. Who do you like best of next of the guys? And I will say there's probably the top 5 tackles. JC Latham of Alabama would be the guy you'd throw in there as the 5th guy. Who's your second favorite tackle in this group?
So for me, in the terms of like the guy that I enjoy, it's Fuaga. Because he's just such a mauler. That guy, he embodies the right tackle position. You can move him to guard if you want to, but I think he's a tackle first. To me, he has the right mindset. That guy just pulverizes people into the ground. And I think when you project forward, that's what he needs. And that's what teams are kind of moving towards. I think we're moving back towards more of a power game into the NFL. We got all spread for a little bit. Now things are going to condense down a little bit more. Fashanu, to me, and that goes back to Ohio State. Ohio State bullied him around. And I think that exposed a lot of weaknesses in his game, whereas Alt, it didn't expose him, it just challenged him. Whereas Fashanu, I felt like didn't really improve over the last 2 years. He's a great athlete. He's going to benefit from NFL coaching. He's got a great body. But I think he also has some limitations, and he's a little too reliant on that athleticism. So for me, I look at Fuaga, and I just think, well, look at his experience level playing guard and tackle. I think his curve is heading upwards as opposed to some of the other guys that have been really good, but they've been kind of like the same guy over the last couple of years. Same with Latham. Like he's great. He's a mauler, but is he reliable? I don't necessarily think he's super reliable right now.
And you think Troy Fautanu from Washington, definite first rounder?
Yeah. I think he's going to be in the mix from what I had kind of heard / seen. I think Seattle is going to be like his floor. Oh, so great. I think he's going to go earlier than what people expect. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, it'd be nice. Washington guys, Seattle. I like it. Good for the Pacific Northwest. All right. So just keep in mind, folks, that again, this is going to be, it's a very strong tackle draft, but it is Northern driven. And we are talking about like truly great Northern tackle drafts. 2008, when there were 4 Northern tackles in the first round, Jake Long from Michigan's the number 1 pick. 2007, we mentioned Joe Thomas of Wisconsin was number 3. Levi Brown from Penn State was number 5, and Joe Staley from Central Michigan, who went on to a great career, was number 28. So like, this is what we're talking about. This is going to be, I think, a tackle group when we talk about these 4 Northern guys that will be making an impact in the NFL for a long time to come. Let's talk receiver. I don't know if it's backlash. I don't know if it's that Marvin Harrison Jr. like didn't do much at the combine or pro day. He basically sat out the process and stood on his film. And I also just think this is how we work. That a guy is like, that's the best player. And then it's like, we're tired of saying that. Let's say something else. And so you will read things, you will see things saying, oh, I know teams that have Malik Neighbors from LSU as the number 1 receiver on the board. I will say, from my biased Northern perspective, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best receiver in this class. And I think Odunze from Washington, with how physical he is the second best receiver in this class. And then we get to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas from LSU. How do you compare the top 2 Northern receivers to those 2 LSU receivers?
Yeah, I think you're right on Marv. I think it's hard too because these guys are stylistically different. Neighbors is so opposite of what Harrison is. Neighbors very easily projects to the NFL and like the modern NFL, which is very Garrett Wilson-like. Speed, quickness, agility, yards after the catch. He's phenomenal at all of that. Marv just plays a different game. But Marv is a traditionally wide receiver 1, exactly what you would build in a lab. That Michael Irvin, that type of throwback, dominant ball, Hall of Fame, prototype that you're talking about. And I think we've been talking about him for so long as such like this vaunted prospect that people get a little bored and maybe like the explosive plays aren't there. I think quarterback, I think we could all agree, probably played into that a little bit last year. Yeah. But I think Marv's that guy. And so at least for me, I do think that Neighbors, you could talk yourself into at least being close to equal because he is so explosive. He isn't that Stephon Diggs type of mold and Wilson. So he's going to have a lot of success, but he's also, smaller, doesn't deal with physicality very well. He's not like a my ball type of guy. You got to put it into his chest in stride. And if you don't, he's not going to be super effective. So that creates a little bit of a curve where it's like, well, he might be more of a DJ Moore than a Stephon Diggs. And so there's just more of that variance there. Whereas I think Marv is like DeAndre Hopkins, where it's like, it just doesn't matter, man. You could have, again, you can go back to me throwing the ball to him. The guy's going to get 1,000 yards, a year. So I think it's a more interesting conversation about Odunze and Neighbors because they are different too. Like Odunze, he reminds me a bit of Michael Thomas when he came out of Ohio State, where Thomas didn't have the production that Odunze had. But in those moments where he would do a stop and go, he would go vertical, he would run a post route. You saw this kind of unique acceleration and burst for his size that's not typical of such a big-bodied receiver. We've seen a little bit more of that freakishness since Thomas entered the NFL. Like we're seeing more of these guys. But Odunze actually puts it on the film and actually can do it. I do worry a little bit that in off coverage, he doesn't use that space well enough. And I wonder if he's more of just a deep guy as opposed to a nuanced route runner. But that's the offense. And that's the hard part of coming from an offense that doesn't ask you to do it. He may get to the NFL. He's got the foot speed. He's got the coordination. He's got the balance. One of the best ball trackers I've ever seen. Like it'd be like Mike Evans and Rome Odunze, and then like everybody else. So the way that he adjusts to the ball when it's in air is unbelievable. I just wish we could have seen more from him in different roles because we only got to see him basically do back shoulder catches and go routes. So it's kind of hard. If he goes to the right quarterback that trusts him, then that's great. I think he's going to be a really good player. I have Neighbors above him, but it's not a huge gap. He's very good. I think both players are more dependent on their situation than someone like Marv is. To me, it's Marv in his own class, then these two guys in like tier 2. And then I would put Brian Thomas pretty well below those guys. I think he's not even a first round talent. Yeah, he's an explosive guy, but I think he's tall, fast, and he's the latest thing on the market. Not saying he'll be bad, but he needs time. He needs at least a year or two to really get great at football.
Yeah. It's such an interesting conversation with quarterbacks and receivers and how the NFL views them and how good they are, how bad they are. It's like, I thought CJ Stroud got a little dinged in the process a year ago because it's like, hey, so many good receivers. And now it's like, well, okay, Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors had the Heisman winner, and Rome Odunze had the guy who finished second in the Heisman, and Marvin Harrison Jr. had a guy who transferred because it didn't really work out. So like, where is how do you take it all into account? So, again, if somebody takes a receiver ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., you're just overthinking, right? You're just you're trying to thread a needle that isn't there. The thread is imaginary. So just take the guy. Okay. Running backs, it's not a great running back draft. Like there's certainly not going to be a first round running back. There's a couple Northern running backs that I'm intrigued by. Audric Estime at Notre Dame is one. Blake Corum at Michigan is one. And I can't quit Braelon Allen from Wisconsin, who is 6'1", 235. He didn't run a 40 at the combine or at his pro day. I don't know. He said he had a high ankle sprain that kind of was lingering from the season. I still think like the top end of Braelon Allen for all those great Wisconsin running backs that we've seen. I just thought Braelon Allen was like that size. And then when he gets to the second level, still was special to me. Of Corum, Allen, and Estime, who are you maybe most intrigued by for this draft?
I think you're right. I think it is Allen, and I think it's because he has the potential to be a really good running back. One, he's still super young. I think he's under 21 years old still. So when he enters the NFL, he's just he's not a baby, but he is like a relative baby. Like Corum is 24. So it's like you're looking at a grown, more of a grown man versus a guy who's just, Allen is ridiculous, and he's been a ridiculous athlete since he was 15, 16. You saw the recruiting videos of him. It's just nuts in the gym. He has that special sense to him. And it reminds me of all these other giant backs that we've talked about. A lot of them just didn't have what he had. And what Allen can do is he moves really well for his size. He's not going to win a lot of 40-yard dashes, but that's fine. Estime ran a 4.7. He's not going to either, and that's fine. what you're looking for is the burst, the power, the explosiveness to wear down defenses actually within those first 20 yards. Everything over 20 yards, that has a lot more to do with blocking and situational play than it does maybe like their breakaway speed, unless if you're getting a 4-2, 4-3 guy. And even then, defenses tend to hone in on those guys. We don't see a lot of breakaway runners anymore. So I'm really interested in someone like Allen. He can contribute on pass plays too, because one, his size gives him incredible pass pro potential. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a pretty good athlete. I think he's really interesting. Estime is close though, because he's almost like Doug Martin, if you remember, like the muscle hamster, where like he just was such a rocked up dude that he was so hard to bring down. And Estime was very, very impressive last year. And obviously Ohio State fans got to see a little bit of that, where he's got better quickness than what you'd expect for his size. And he actually is functionally just super strong. It's not just he's big, he's actually strong and can make guys miss a little bit and create those really good tackling angles. So I think both guys, you know, if I were to rank the running backs in this class, it's really close. I've got Jonathan Brooks from Texas, Trey Benson from Florida State as my top two guys. But Estime and Allen are right there. Like, they're not far behind. They're definitely heads and shoulders above. We have like a slew of RB2s and third down backs. Bucky Irving from Oregon, who I absolutely love, but he's a limited contributor. He's like 5'9", 185 pounds. It's like, that guy's not going to be a number one back. Allen could actually come in, and Estime could come in and be a stud. Whereas Corum, I think, is probably like that high-end RB2. He has to be part of a pretty good offensive system. That injury that he suffered last year, I thought clearly took something from him. And that's a shame, because I think if he would have stayed healthy through that last season, he might have been a second-round pick last year. This year, he might go third, fourth round, and he's probably going to be pretty productive. But I think something changed with him physically that just, I wonder if it's ever going to come back.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think if he doesn't get hurt in that Illinois game in 22, I think he might win the Heisman, you know, but you do see, even as I mean, he's a Michigan legend, but he was with Hassan Haskins in 21, and then he was with Donovan Edwards in 22 and 23, and they worked that two-man backfield so well. And obviously they leaned on Corum more last year, but yeah, and that's like not a criticism to be like, well, this guy's probably a complimentary back. He can be a productive NFL player, and again, he's 5'8". Like, we're talking about like a different kind of a size profile here. But I feel like Braelon Allen could be a guy that goes in the third round and then like starts opening day for an NFL team and has like an 1,100-yard season as a rookie. And it's like, he does got in the third round. He's pretty good. All right. Last thing I want to talk about is corner. Right? 3 top corners. Is that right? Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, Terrion Arnold from Alabama, and then Cooper DeJean from Iowa, assuming people see him as a corner and not a safety. Feels like certainly Mitchell and DeJean both at least have a chance to go in the top half of the first round. Like, who is your favorite corner in this draft? And maybe even if it is Terrion Arnold.
Yeah, so I have Mitchell as number one. I think he's just the best athlete of the group. And Cooper is an amazing athlete. Like, it's not a slight on him. It's just, look at Mitchell's experience. He was so impressive at Toledo that it was just like you knew what you were watching. You were watching an NFL guy against low-level competition. It was one of those things where it's like, all right, I've got to see him do it at the Combine. I have to see him do it at the Senior Bowl, because if he does, this guy's a real stud. And then he did it. He went out, he dominated those guys. He put up awesome athleticism numbers. So it's like check mark, check mark, check mark. This guy's going to be really good. So to me, he is number one. Arnold, I think, is in the mix. He's so versatile. He's a playmaker, but he doesn't quite have like that top end athleticism. He's a little bit stiff. He's a little bit more of a zone corner. Whereas I shy away from those guys a little bit, because I do like those man cover corners. Whereas DeJean, I really hope someone uses him to his full potential, because in terms of playmaking, getting the ball in his hands as a return man, his instincts and his awareness, he's just, I struggle to put a comp on him. Like, it's almost, he's not Jalen Ramsey, because he didn't have that type of same impact, but he's in the mold of like a Jalen Ramsey, because he can do so much, and he's such a high IQ player. And he's got the athleticism to go with it, which is so uncommon. Like, usually you see smart guys, or you just see athletic guys. And this guy really gets the game. So I really do like DeJean a lot. I'm glad to see that seems like he's been rising lately, which is, I think, I think it's like the media getting a sniff that say, hey, we kind of forgot about him because his 2023 wasn't as explosive as 2022. But the film's been there. He's really good. I almost wonder if he's a better safety than a corner, but he is a very good corner. So I can't wait to see where he goes. I just hope it's a creative spot, like how Baltimore uses Kyle Hamilton makes so much sense for DeJean, because if you just put him at corner, I feel like you're leaving some meat on the bone.
I also love Mike Sainristil from Michigan, who seems like a second-round pick. What do you think of him?
I'm interested. I think he's going to be situational. Like anytime that you hit like day 2 corners, it's going to be really like, okay, are you actually playing to this guy's strengths? And so I just wonder, and this cornerback class to me really takes a dip after McKinstry. There's some interesting guys, but Kool-Aid's such a man cover guy. So he could potentially fall Nate Wiggins. Like he's in that same mix. Like they're good players. I don't know that they're top level athletes, and like that slips into day 2 where it's just like you've got speed or you've got this one trait, but I don't know that they've got. And he's in that mix where it's like I don't know that he's got the complete well-roundedness to be more than like a solid number 2 or decent number 2.
All right, that's our Northern breakdown for this 2024 NFL Draft. Starts on Thursday night, obviously. Ian Valentino from the 33rd team. Man, you're just killing it, man. You're just doing your thing, and you're listening. You're listening to Kings of the North. You're watching. Do you ever watch film and listen to Kings of the North simultaneously?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky to where I can work or write or do anything and listen to something simultaneously. So absolutely.
Oh, so all right. I'm going to start shouting out your name in the middle of the show sometimes. Be like, "Hey, Ian, what are you doing? What are you watching film?" So we'll have you back on, man. I really like the way you break down the draft and the way you analyze film and break down players. So I found that super helpful because I'm just a guy who shouts into a microphone. So thanks to everybody for joining us here again on Kings of the North. We'll be back next week. We'll be running through a bunch of spring games again. Oregon, Nebraska, West Virginia, Rutgers, Maryland, a bunch more teams playing spring games on Saturday when you can be watching spring games and also be watching the third day of the draft. You can do those simultaneously, just like Ian, is able to multitask. So Ian Valentino, so grateful for your time and your expertise. Thanks to everybody for watching. For now, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.